This is Jenny Kunkel, and in this video, we're going to take a look at backup and recovery of a database. We are going to be focusing on SQL Server since it's a little bit simpler, but some of the same types of principles apply to Oracle. The first question that we need to answer is, why do we back up our databases? Well, we have hardware failures that can occur. We want to make sure that we have something that we can recover because we don't want to lose our database if for some reason we have a hardware crash. We don't necessarily want to lose the activity that was applied to our database. We want to be able to recover at least to an almost current time frame. Sometimes you can't get the most current time frame, but you want to at least not lose everything from the database perspective. We also have scripts that we write that might be in such a manner that we're running it in our test environment. We think everything is just hunky-dory, and then we try to move it to our production environment, run it, and then we have some type of really big mess on our hands because the script didn't necessarily perform what we expected it to do, and we need to be able to get back to a state really quickly. When I first started working as a programmer at Caterpillar many moons ago, one of the first things that my project manager said was that if you create a mess, you have to be able to clean it up. If you can't clean it up, then you have no business being in IT. And the backup and recovery functions allow us to have some of those capabilities that we can recover from situations and get back to a state where we can move forward. Now, in our case, we are looking at our Docker configuration here. One of the configurations is where we're doing our backup. And we can look at our env log and see that we are using our var opt SQL Server /backup directory in our container. If we switch over to our container, we're just going to go ahead and look at what is currently there. We can go into our terminal and do an ls-l. We're currently in our backup directory. We can see that we are there by doing a pwd, and it's giving us the var opt SQL Server backup directory. Right now, we just have AdventureWorks 2019 backed up, and we want to go ahead and back up our pet DB. We're going to play around with that one. In our case, we're going to switch over to SQL Server Management Studio, and one of the things that we have is we want to go and click on our database, and this is where we can do a right click. Then if we go into Tasks and Backup, it's going to bring up our dialog for our backup for the database. We have options underneath our backup types. We can do a full, a differential, and a transaction log. And the very first thing that we would start with is a full. We need to get a full backup before we can do any type of differential. The full backup is going to back up the whole entire database. Then we have our differential backup, and that, as I indicated, is going to require a full backup, and it's going to store the differences between the previous backup and the current database. And then, of course, we have the transaction log, and it's going to store the information about the transaction log. So essentially what this is going to contain is the redo logs, the undo tablespace, and the archive logs. Now, with SQL Server, this is something that it allocates a certain set space for, and it will potentially truncate and overwrite transactions where you could lose some information if you're not frequently backing up the transaction logs. So this is something you would do frequently. The differential you might do every night. That full backup, maybe your criticality is such that you only need to back it up every 2 weeks. That's going to essentially be determined based on the criticality of your database and then how frequently it's updated as well. If you have something that's only updated once a month, then really probably don't need to do any more backups other than the once a month, and that would be fine. But if it's something that's going to be heavily used every day, maybe it's something where your full backup is weekly, your incremental or your differential. Incremental is typically a term that they use in Oracle, and in DB2, differential is the SQL Server term. Maybe you're doing that every night, and then with SQL Server, maybe you're doing that backup for that transaction log every hour. Depending on how much activity it is, maybe you're doing it more frequently than every hour. maybe every half an hour. Just depends on how much space and the criticality and number of users that are potentially making updates to your system. So we're going to start with our full. We're going to take a look at our media options. Now we have a backup to the existing media set. That's the one that we're going to choose. We'll see that we can make some changes if we were doing to a new media, that we have encryption that we can actually add as an option, but we're going to do the backup to the existing media set, so encryption will not be enabled for our backup. We can check the reliability of our backup and verify it when it's finished. We can also check out where we're going to write our medium, make sure that everything is okay there before we start writing, because if it's not, then our backup would be bad and we wouldn't be able to use it. So we probably want to do that as well. And then we can indicate what we want to do if there happens to be an error. Do we want to continue the backup or do we want to fail out? We are also going to take a look at the backup options. So this is going to give us options for when our backup will expire. We can also, as I indicated, set the encryption if we have the new media set in the media options. We have different options for our backup compression, so we can compress the backup or not compress the backup. And in our case, we're just going to use that default setting. Now, if we go back to the general, one of the other options that we have available is we can put these things on schedule. So in our case, maybe we would want to go ahead and write this out to a file. In our case, we're just going to move it to a window because we can't set it up on file. But we can look at all the options that are set and essentially going to generate a script for us. We could then save our script and then set it up in the SQL Server agent. Unfortunately, our version of our container doesn't allow us to get into that SQL Server agent and set anything up on schedule. But if we wanted to then go ahead and set this up every 2 weeks, we could do that. We would save our script and then we would indicate on our script that we would want to run it every 2 weeks, and then it would automatically happen for us on schedule, and we would not have to come into the interface and manually do those backups. So if we go ahead and just highlight this and execute it, we can see that it happened pretty fast. Of course, that database is really small, so it's really not doing a whole lot. If we go back to our Docker container and do an ls-l, we can see that we now have our petdb _log backup file that is there. Now, if we go back to SQL Server, we want to go ahead and do a differential. And in this case, we're going tasks and then back into the backup. This time we're going to pick that differential. We're not going to change anything else, and we're just going to apply. That's completed. Now we're going to go ahead and do one of the transaction logs. Of course, we would be spacing them out, but we just want to go ahead and create one of each. And in this case, we're going back into the tasks and going into the backup. This time we're picking the transaction log, saying okay, and we're done. Now, if I go back over here, notice I only see that one file because remember it's appending to the one file. So let's go back into SQL Server Management Studio, and I can do a right-click task and restore the database. I can also do it up here as well. Problem is, if I do it up here where I'm restoring the database, I have to pick it from the list based off of the backups that are out there. But if I go this way, it should already be pegged to that particular database. And if I come in and restore the database, it's going to bring up the dialog. And notice it has that database preset. Now we see that we have all of our backup files that are pre-selected for us. It would assume that if you have a problem, that you probably want to go back, restore from the last full backup, then any incrementals and transaction logs to get back to the most current state. You go ahead and say okay, and it's going to run, and we're back. Now, if I wanted to, with this, there is the option to put it on schedule. This is not something that you would typically want to do because that means that you're probably having problems with your database. The only thing that I can think of where you might want to go ahead and script something out is if you're doing a production full backup or even maybe a test backup after you copied something from production and loaded it from a backup, then you want to go ahead and set it on a schedule because you're doing lots of testing, you're mucking up the data, and every week maybe you want to reset the database to the fresh state before you do more testing. So that would be the only time that I would think that maybe you would want to run a restore in a database willingly and put it on schedule. But you can come up here and you can see that it basically brought this back, and then you could run that script as well. So it gives you that option as well. And then you could put that on the scheduler maybe every week to do it in your test database, or even if it's daily, depending on your testing and how much testing you're doing for an application, you could put it on a more frequent schedule. I cannot indicate the importance of making sure that you're taking those backups on the correct cadence is very, very important.